We're off on a dream cruise around some of the most romantic and beautiful spots in Europe. From the dramatic northern home of the Vikings to the mystical land of the pyramids, we're going in search of a very special experience, Europe from the water. We'll cruise every kind of waterway, from the northern seas to the glorious Mediterranean, from mighty rivers to picturesque canals. We'll meet the locals and make some new friends. We'll visit haunted glens in Scotland, fairy tale palaces in France, and volcanic islands in Greece, stopping only to savor the timeless pleasures of Europe. Join us on this unique voyage as we set out on a scenic cruise through romantic Europe. We set sail in the very north of Europe, where we'll be following a route taken by some of the world's greatest seafarers, the Vikings. Like them, we'll be going on a voyage of discovery in the waters of northern Europe. Our destination, Scotland's haunting landscape and the Celtic beauty of the Isle of Skye. But our starting point is the ancient birthplace of the Vikings, Norway. It's a dramatic beginning on one of the most jagged coastlines in the world, the Norwegian fjords. Here, a boat is the only way to travel. On this autumn day, we're all alone as we plunge deeper inland. Dwarfed by the sheer rock walls towering above us, it's easy to believe in the ancient Norse gods whose home this was said to be. It takes the sudden blaze of the sun to banish those Nordic shades. And wherever we look, there's water, cascading down towards us. It's coming not just from rain and snow, but from the melting of Norway's icy heart. The Norwegian glaciers, remains of the ice cap that once covered this whole land, are slowly retreating. It's hard to believe, but the last time these ice crystals were water was before humans trod the earth. From the lonely beauty of the fjords, we're heading towards a busier part of the coast, to visit a bustling, colourful port that dates from medieval times. Sigmund Kolsrud, our boatman, steers us across the harbour. He's putting us ashore at his hometown of Bergen. It's Bruggen, the oldest part of Bergen, that we're heading for. For centuries, this has been a centre for northern maritime trade. Everything here is built of wood, carved and painted in a celebration of local crafts. We've time for a little shopping and a visit to a very Norwegian market. Every sort of seafood, fresh from the North Sea. They've been selling fish here for hundreds of years, so for expert tips on buying and cooking our fish supper, this is the place to come. We've been promised a memorable end to our visit to Bergen, but we won't be needing either a car or a boat. A cable car takes us high above the bay, just in time for the sunset. It's time to pick up the Viking Trail across the North Sea. We're taking one of the local steamers southward to a Viking port, which is now Norway's capital, Oslo. A 1,000 years ago, this was a simple Viking settlement. From this perfect natural harbour, Viking explorers set sail, as we will do for the northern coast of Scotland. There's time to spend an evening in what is now a sophisticated city. This is the place for bright lights. There's a wealth of cultural life to sample too. Oslo is the home of the Nobel Peace Prize, as well as the playwright Ibsen. And the capital is the official residence of one of Europe's last surviving royal families. It's time to leave this land of sea and mountains behind. Hundreds of years ago, the Vikings, ancestors of modern Norwegians, set sail from this very place. In open longships, barely 18 meters long, they conquered the stormy seas of the North Sea and the Atlantic beyond. Following in their wake, we are heading for the windswept beauty of the Hebrides. The Vikings sailed right around the north of Scotland to get to the Isle of Skye, but we are going to take a different route. From Misty, Inverness, there's a famous shortcut through the very heart of Scotland. It'll take us to the legendary lochs, glens and castles of the Highlands, and all without touching dry land. The 19th century Caledonian Canal links a series of lochs to take us coast to coast from here to Fort William. There's a steady trade in cabin cruisers for the trip, but we've chosen Ian Mackay as our skipper. And for this romantic Highlands cruise, he's taking us on one of the most romantic vessels in these parts. Travelling on the Yalavan, that's Gaelic and means white swan, is like taking a step back in time. Everything on this lovingly restored old craft is authentic, even down to the ropes. Ian has promised to take us right away from the everyday world, and before long, he's doing just that. This is one of the world's eeriest stretches of water, Loch Ness. It's said that beneath these dark waters lives a monster, one that every now and then appears on this placid surface. There's certainly room for a whole family of Nessies in these peat-black waters. The loch is deeper than the North Sea. Bob the helmsman knows the loch well, but he is not giving anything away. A freshening breeze means Ian can get the Yalavan under sail in the old-fashioned way. And there, rising from the mists of Loch Ness, are the battle-scarred ruins of Urquhart Castle, overlooking the loch since the mid-1200s. It's our first taste of the troubled history of Scotland, a centuries-old saga of warring clans and kings, rebellions and deadly sieges, heroic deeds and treachery. The souls of the dead are said to wander the surrounding glens. On Loch Ness, the idea of haunted castles doesn't feel far-fetched. Now it's time for the Yalavan to really come into her own. With the wind behind us, we sail towards the far end of the loch, leaving the mysteries of Loch Ness behind us. In Fort Augustus, where Loch Ness rejoins the Caledonian Canal, we're firmly back in the real world. And part of the real world of canal cruises is going through the locks. We're changing levels in a series of watery ups and downs. Soon we're on our way again. Before us, some hidden gems of the Highlands. This is Loch Oich, an undisturbed haven where nature simply gets on with what it does best. And beyond it, Loch Lochy, a classically grand Highland vista. We've sailed almost all the way across Scotland by water. From the last loch, Loch Linney, we can smell the open sea once more. And it's there that we're heading, like a bird on the wing, over the sea to sky. We're here to see for ourselves the raw beauty that has captivated Hebridean visitors for generations. It's to this island that the defeated Bonnie Prince Charlie, pretender to the English throne, fled in 1746, disguised as a lady's maid. Smuggled from here to France, he escaped with his life, but never saw Scotland again. This is true Celtic country, where Gaelic is still spoken. The people of Skye are reputed to have the Celtic gift of second sight. Even the cattle here are rumoured to see spirits. And many are the local tales of sprites and fairies, and of will-o'-the-wisps flitting like soft blue lights through the dusk. Out here on the edges of the North Atlantic, a surreal landscape of rock and weather forms a backdrop to the seascape beyond. This rocky outcrop is called the Old Man of Storr. A hoard of ancient jewels was once found at its foot, an unsolved mystery from the island's checkered history. We're leaving the rugged beauty of Scotland in search of history of a different kind. But first, there is one more stop to make. Here stands the castle of Elandonnan, which has guarded this spectacular spot for nearly 1,000 years. The castle even saw off marauding Vikings. And with its limpid beauty, this feels a fitting place to leave this misty, haunting land. For the next leg of our European cruise, we're going right to the heart of a continent famously rich in history, culture, and the good things of life. Our ultimate destination, a spectacular wetland wilderness on the fringes of the Mediterranean. To get there, we've found a way that gives us a perfect view of the best of mainland Europe. We're going to cruise from north to south on 3 great European rivers, the Rhone, the Loire, and for our starting point, the Rhine. The Rhine is one of the world's mightiest rivers, linking 4 countries as it flows towards the North Sea. It plunges deep into the heartland of Germany, through one of Europe's most famous valleys. We're stepping aboard one of the Rhine steamers and setting off in search of the magical castles of the Rhineland. We're making a first stop at Mainz. It's a medieval city, but there's a modern treasure here we wouldn't want to miss. First, though, there's a market that's perfect for picking up supplies for our trip. Among the Baroque painted houses and the outdoor cafes, it's easy to feel part of a European lifestyle. What we've really come to see in Mainz lies within this building, the Church of St. Stephen. breathtaking stained glass windows were completed by the artist Marc Chagall just before his death. Chagall, one of the few modern artists working in stained glass, used these joyful, singing colors to express his hopes for peace and reconciliation between nations and religions. From Mainz, the river carries us on towards the Rhineland. As this ageless landscape comes within sight, it's clear that we'll have a grandstand view. In medieval times, when these castles and towns were built, the river was the lifeblood of the country, and everything faced towards it. From the road, we'd just be seeing the back doors. These may look like fairy tale castles, but the reality was much more deadly. The Rhine was once divided into fiefdoms whose barons fought for land and access to that vital artery, the river. The castles were built for serious business: war. It was a game of power and strategy. One baron here at the Pfalz even tried to control the river traffic with a fortified toll gate in the middle of the river. This is the landscape that inspired the composer Wagner when he wrote his famous Ring cycle of dramatic operas. His heroes and warriors were drawn from mythology, and there's certainly a mythic quality about the valley as we approach the sinister outcrop of the Lorelei. There's a legend that the Lorelei was a danger to shipping in more ways than one. A beautiful Rhine maiden was said to lure sailors to a watery grave with her magical song. Gliding safely past the Lorelei, we head towards one of the most spectacular of the Rhine's 60 castles, Burg Katz, or Castle Cat. It's worth a stop here. It's a bit of a climb up to the castle, but from the top you can see just why the builders chose this spot. It dominates this whole stretch of the river. And just a little way from Castle Cat, it comes as no surprise to find Castle Mouse. But we haven't come to the Rhine just for its castles. We are going to go wine tasting. We're joining a wine tasting group at the biggest vineyard in the region, Schloss Eberbach. Eberbach wines are amongst the finest of the Rhine. They're made from the noble Riesling grape, which gives them the fruity, scented elegance, which is their trademark.
Denn es ist ein fantastischer Wein. Bedenken Sie, ist 11 Jahre alt und das schmeckt man nicht nur, sondern das riecht man auch, denn hat im positiven Sinne noch keine Firma, aber doch schon einen sehr positiven.
And now for a great privilege. We alone are allowed to pass on through the sealed gates of the wine library, the biggest seller of fine white wines in Europe. This is the treasure house of Eberbach. And this is the man who safeguards the winery's future. Herr Anton Prasser is the wine master here, watching over the progress of every barrel. We're leaving the splendors of the Rhine to go in search of castles of a different sort. On another river, the French Loire. En route to the Loire, we're going to take a short break from the water. For our introduction to France, Jane Adamson is taking us on a balloon ride.
Si vous allez avoir chaud, parce qu'il va faire chaud.
She's promised to give us a special view of our first destination. And she doesn't let us down. This is Chenonceau, most glamorous of the famous Loire chateaux. Now, these really are fairy tale castles. Unlike the battle-scarred fortifications we visited on the Rhine, the French chateaux were built for fun. For the lords and ladies who spent their 16th century leisure time here, nothing was too good. The guests, often in elaborate fancy dress, were entertained amongst fountains flowing with wine. There were picnics, balls and parties, and then this kitchen became a hive of activity. Here the finest chefs in France labored day and night, cooking streams of sumptuous food for hundreds of guests. A little further along the Loire, there's a chateau where guests would be tempted to stay outside. Here at Villandry, a gardener's dream has come to life. These gardens, conceived in the early 16th century, have been magnificently restored. This is true Renaissance design. We may think that using vegetables as decorative plants is a modern idea. But the Villandry garden designers were way ahead of us. You could say that the French so love food that they even garnish their palaces. As the sun sets, we leave the languid beauty of the Loire and head south towards the Mediterranean. We join a third mighty river, the Rhône. This is the river that will take us into a magical region of sun, wine, and olives, Provence. It's easy to fall in love with Provence. Its special light bathes everything in a golden glow. We've stopped at this small Provençal town to visit the home of one of France's most famous wines, Châteauneuf-du-Pape. These rich red wines of the south are polar opposites to the delicate white Rieslings of the Rhine. The vines may look stunted and the soil stony, yet from these grapes comes an unforgettable wine. And the stones, they're called galets, and by retaining the sun's heat into the night, they help give the grapes the depth of flavour for which Châteauneuf-du-Pape is renowned. The glittering Rhône takes us onwards into the very heart of Provence, the ancient river port of Arles. Since Roman times, Arles has been a magnet for visitors. Late in the 19th century, the Dutch painter Vincent van Gogh enjoyed life here so much that he immortalized it in his paintings and showed us how that most important part of French life, the café, hasn't changed at all. And on a small canal nearby, there's another moment of déjà vu. Beyond Arles, the Rhône slows and widens yet more. We've reached one of France's great wildernesses, the Camargue. These are flatlands, salt lakes reclaimed from the Mediterranean, separated by patches of dry land. It's a water dweller's paradise. Not many humans live the tough life of the Camargue. Among them are the cowboys who look after the most famous locals, the wild white horses of the Camargue. Less well known are the Camargue bulls. They may look placid, but they're bred for the bull ring. Bullfights are as common here as in Spain. And swooping above our heads are the flamingos, an unusual sight in Europe. The wild beauty of the Camargue marks the end of our river journey through the heart of Europe. The next leg of our journey is by sea, a leisurely cruise around the sun-soaked coast of southern Europe. Our starting point is a land whose whole history is wrapped up with the sea. This is Lisbon, capital of Portugal and home of some of the world's greatest maritime explorers. Turned proudly out towards the sea, with its sprawl of buildings clinging to the hillsides, Lisbon is a city that celebrates the old and embraces the new. There are echoes of San Francisco and Rio de Janeiro. These landmarks symbolize centuries-old transatlantic connections. It was from Lisbon that Portuguese explorers set sail for the Americas. It was a world-beating culture of sea exploration. It nurtured Vasco da Gama, Magellan, and Columbus. The Tower of Belém, basking in the setting sun, was built as these great explorers were dreaming of new lands 600 years ago. Ashore for the night, our thoughts turn to nightlife. It has to be fado, the traditional melancholy music of the Portuguese in love. Lisbon is a city of contrasts, and so widely spread, it's hard to take it all in. From palatial squares to tiny winding streets, it's mostly hills. To get around, we're going to need some help. Our tram driver, Herminio, introduces us to his solution. And when the going gets tougher, there are the cable cars. They bring us to the flea market, considered by dedicated bargain hunters to be one of the best in the world. As a centuries-old port, Lisbon's seen a constant stream of rare and beautiful things, and many have remained. For appetites sharpened by bargain hunting, the cafes of Lisbon are too good to miss. Cakes are the local speciality, especially the pastéis de Natal, light custard tarts sprinkled with sugar and cinnamon. For a last quick lift before we leave this city of ups and downs, there's the 100-year-old elevador. Just beyond the city's sprawl, there's a green oasis where the heat and bustle are left behind. It's an idyllic valley with a cool, humid microclimate, Sintra. For centuries a retreat for the rich and powerful of Lisbon, Sintra is filled with castles and palaces, each more extravagant than the last. And on top of a neighboring hill, a real fantasy castle, the Palacio de Peña. Just about every architectural style has a place in this royal palace, although it was actually built by King Ferdinand in the 19th century. There's time to take one last look out to sea before we leave Portugal behind. From the most westerly point of mainland Europe, we head once more towards British soil. But this time we'll be nearly 2,500 kilometers away from the United Kingdom. Known as the Rock, British-owned Gibraltar marks the narrow entrance to the Mediterranean. Here, Europe is separated from Africa by just a few kilometers, and Morocco is a short ferry ride away. But to really take in Gibraltar's unique position, we need to climb the rock itself. Gibraltar may cover only 6.5 square kilometers, but it's on a natural crossroads, and for centuries, everyone who entered the Mediterranean had to pass this spot. The rock's famous Barbary apes are not homegrown. They were brought across from Africa by sailors 300 years ago. Strategically, it's important that the rock has its own airport, but fitting in a landing strip was something of a challenge. Planes have right-of-way. Before we leave this tiny outpost of Britain, there's one last surprise. Hidden within the rock, a natural limestone cavern, the Cave of St. Michael. There's a whole series of these deep caves. It was once believed that they extended under the sea, forming a subterranean passage to Africa. Now we're into the Mediterranean proper, an enclosed but not necessarily tranquil sea into which the whole of southern Europe dips its toes. Sweeping along the coast, we're ready to make a stop, to get into the Mediterranean mood in a typical French seaside town. There's an idyllic beach. And there's a harbour bobbing with local boats. Wandering through the winding streets, we get a sense of a slower, more traditional pace of life. We're lucky to do so. This is Saint-Tropez, for once blissfully free of the crush of seasonal tourists. It's a gentler, friendlier place. We're even invited to watch a game of boule. The players take this ancient game very seriously. They even ignore the weather. The brisk north wind, the famous Mistral, takes us out to sea on the next leg of our journey, deep into the southern Mediterranean. Here, nestling in one of the most vibrant blue seas on the planet, is the Greek island of Santorini. It's a stunning spot for a vacation, but it also holds the clue to a 3,000-year-old mystery. It all adds up to an unforgettable destination for our cruise. Perched above the rocky cliffs that make Santorini so dramatic, Ia is all that we expect a Greek island village to be. It feels as if we're floating over the crystal blue sea. The heat of the midday sun has sent everyone indoors to their siesta. Well, almost everyone. From up here, we can see other islands in the group, the Cyclades. Below, a beach, but there's no sign of golden sands because Santorini is a volcanic island. It's formed from colored lava thrown out from deep within the Earth's crust. On this beach, the sand is almost black. And a little further along, there's a beach that's red. In fact, the whole of one side of Santorini has been blown apart, leaving fragments now cut off from the main island. The volcano is quiet now, but around 3,500 years ago, a massive eruption not only devastated all life on Santorini, it obliterated an entire civilization. The Minoans were probably the first sophisticated European civilization, yet they disappeared without trace. We know they built a city on nearby Crete, and now we know that there was also a Minoan city here at Akrotiri. Both remained forgotten until the 20th century, and it was these excavations that told us why. It was Santorini's fateful volcanic eruption that buried Akrotiri, and probably created a tidal wave that devastated Crete. Now, all we have left of this fascinating civilization are these tantalizing fragments. To end our romantic Mediterranean cruise, we're going a little further afield, to a land where the remnants of the past lie, not buried, but powerfully visible. We're stepping outside Europe for a trip along one of the world's most breathtaking waterways. These are the wide, smooth-flowing waters of the Nile, the sacred river of Egypt. They're taking us back to an ancient world, one that moves no faster than the mighty river. Aboard this typical Nile cruiser, straight out of the 1930s, we're following a time-honored route into the heart of Egypt's history. Almost at once, we're transported back nearly 5 millennia. Here at Giza, the landscape has been unchanged since the days of the pharaohs, those living gods whose burial pyramids reach upwards towards the heavens. Carved from an outcropping of limestone, the massive figure of the Sphinx guards the pyramids through time. As our steamer takes us south from Giza, we can see that the Nile truly is the lifeblood of Egypt. Its annual flood brings life to the desert. Without the Nile, nothing that we see around us could exist. A unique skyline announces our arrival at Luxor. From Luxor, a line of sphinxes leads to the legendary temple of Karnak. This was the holiest place for the ancient Egyptians, where they believed the world was created and where the pharaohs, the god kings, were crowned. The scale dwarfs mere mortals. This hall holds more than 100 of these giant pillars. For the last part of our journey, we're getting even closer to the water, in a felucca, the traditional single-sailed craft of the Nile. We're traveling deeper into the rural heart of Egypt, heading for the climax of our trip, Abu Simbel. Four gigantic statues dominate the landscape. They all depict the powerful pharaoh Ramses II. For thousands of years, they've sat at the southernmost end of Egypt, facing outwards towards the rest of Africa. But they didn't always sit at this exact spot. Before the Aswan Dam flooded the valley, the entire temple was moved, stone by stone, to this new, safe site above the water level. With this awe-inspiring sight, our cruise draws to its end, here in the ancient land of southern Egypt. From the romance of Europe to the excitement of exotic lands, our next cruise takes us into the world's greatest ocean, the Pacific. We'll follow the wind and the waves along timeless sailing routes in search of paradise islands and cultures old and new.